Welcome to Sipping Sense, Sips and Swigs, a monthly edutainment podcast designed to introduce you to intriguing and unique people and innovations in the wine world. Are you thinking of starting your own venture in the wine and spirits sector? Or are you an entrepreneur that works in the industry? You don't want to miss the pearls of wisdom find here from our guests. My name is Stephanie Brown, author of Sipping Sense, Uncorking the Flavors of Wine, Entertaining and Healthy Cooking. And today I have the pleasure of having a conversation with my good friend, Jen Harrington.
Hello, Stephanie. Thanks for having me.
Jen is the founder and CEO of the Hatch Agency. Since 2009, she and her agency have been helping big and small brands across all categories find their voice and drive their businesses forward. Prior to Hatch, she was a managing partner at Trinity Communications, where she led client services and managed relationships with world-class brands like Fidelity, Liberty Mutual, and John Hancock. She's been recognized as Boston's 40 Under 40 by the Boston Business Journal and was awarded the Greater Boston's Chamber Pinnacle Leadership Award for Entrepreneurship in 2021. She sits on several nonprofit and foundation boards that focus on fair access to public arts education. She's a wife, a mother, and a dog lover. And I'm really excited to sit down and talk to Jen today about branding. What is branding? So tell us a little bit more about how Hatch was hatched first.
Sure. Well, Hatch was sort of an accident at the beginning, if I'm going to be honest. I grew up as the daughter of an entrepreneur, and my daily conversations around the dinner table when I was young were all about sort of the joys and trials and tribulations of running a business. Therefore, I decided I absolutely did not want to do that as an adult. And I went to school to be an art historian, actually. I have always loved creative and the creative process. So I went to school to study art history, and I worked at a gallery for several years in Boston after I graduated, and sort of discovered that while I loved the opportunity to work with artists and to be part of the creative economy in that way, it wasn't necessarily the thing that was going to drive the rest of my career. So I switched gears. I did a ton of informational interviews. I wound up at an advertising agency, and I started there, and I grew my career under the mentorship of several people over a long period of time. And I learned how to work with creative people in the advertising industry. I learned to be a brand strategist. And most importantly for Hatch, I learned how to run the business. That doesn't happen enough in small businesses where we're sort of teaching one another how to run a business. When I parted ways with my old agency, I hadn't really thought that I was going to start something new. I needed to take a break and think about what my next step was going to be. But I wound up getting called by a number of people who knew me or had worked with me in the past, who asked me to help with some projects and things. And that's launched the business. And I wound up with so much business over such a short period of time that I sort of had to make a decision. Was I going to be an independent consultant, or was I going to try to start an agency? So I backed into it, if that makes any sense.
Mhm.
Sometimes people ask me, like, oh, wasn't it so scary to start your own business? And I sort of say, well, at the time, I'm not really sure I knew what I was doing. But fast forward 16 years later, I definitely have felt the highs and lows of running my own business.
Well, it's kind of how you and I fell into our relationship as being one of my first customers in my consulting world. But
Yes.
also I found you, which I
You
always
knew me, though. You knew
I
me.
found you
Yeah.
because I was one of your clients. And so that's kind of cool to have that background, which is why I know you know so much about brand. And so I'm excited to have you talk to our audience about brand, because I really think people get brand and marketing all mixed up. I know I have and probably still do. And so can you give us the technical definition of brand and then tell us who has an amazing brand and why? Think about somebody that you work with,
Yeah.
somebody that you know a little bit about all kinds of brands. Because in your overview, I said you work with big and small, and you also have had a lot of experience with all kinds of brands.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think one of the ways to define brand is to say what it's not, because there's a lot of misconceptions around brand, and it's a word that gets thrown around a lot. And I find when I'm working with clients or different organizations, it's really important to get grounded on how they understand brand and come to some sort of shared definition. So a lot of times you hear brand as a campaign of some sort, or it's a logo. And there are a lot of like, we want to rebrand, but we don't want to touch the logo. Well, that's okay. There are lots of different ways to talk about shaping a brand, so to speak. But I think that the definition of brand is the human relationship between an organization and its customers that gets shaped over time through experience. And experience can come from all kinds of places. It can be an experience that you have when you're trying to go online and understand about an organization, or it could be a customer service experience, or it could be a bad experience. It can be a purchase experience. It can be the way that communicated with over time. There are lots of different touch points for brand. And when I started my career, candidly, Stephanie, there were way fewer touch points. Now, influencer campaigns are a touch point that have become critical to the way brands shape themselves. So I think there's a lot of different avenues for brand building, but ultimately it comes back to human experience. You asked me some of the brands that I really like, that I think have been doing a really interesting job. I have been really captivated by Chime, which is an online bank. They
A
just went
bank, the
public.
bank, okay.
They've only been around, I think, for 7 years. And they have catapulted themselves to glory because they have worked incredibly hard to get very close to their customers and their customers' pain points. And they've built an entire brand around how to alleviate some of the things that are the most frustrating in a banking relationship. I find them incredibly interesting. One of the things that they did is they focused on the underserved population in banking and also the fee fatigued. So sometimes we have had certainly banking relationships where you get sort of poked and prodded with fees here, there, and everywhere. Or there's some delays in access to funds, right? Like your paycheck, or you have a larger check and it gets held. Well, they've sort of lowered the bar on all of those things, and they've built incredible brand loyalty over time. They provide very unique customer experiences like early access to your paycheck. There's no banking fees. I think there's no overdraft fees. But they did this one thing that I think is so interesting, which is they created this almost like, if we think about a brand guideline, it's almost like a customer brand experience guideline. They called it their best in class service model and a mission statement, but it's also filled with all of the things that they're trying to do to build meaningful customer experience. And it has helped the brand prioritize the things that move the meter with customers the most. And so I have to say, I've been really impressed with what they've done. And I think there's a lot of learning that we all can take from a brand like Chime. I wish I had something to do with it, but I certainly admire it from afar.
You kind of touched on something talking about the underserved community.
Yeah.
You and I have always talked a lot about how do you make sure that you are thinking about that when you're thinking about brand. What does being culturally relevant mean? I like the idea of lessening the fee structure. That's kind of cool because people who have the less are the ones that get taxed the most on fees. To me, that's taking advantage of people. You make one mistake and all of a sudden it follows you for the next 20 years.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about kind of how you work with your customers because I think I had the experience of you really taking me through some, I call a process and a rigor around how do I build a brand or what do I think my brand is.
Mm.
So, are there like two or three inputs you think are extremely important. And when there's somebody's thinking about how do they build a brand, like when do you know you have a brand? Or how do you know you have a brand? It's almost kind of intangible type of thing. When I think about brand, I think sometimes it's intangible, so you can't put your hand on it. So when you think about what is my brand, and then is it what I really want it to be, and then how do I
Mhm.
build it, and then
Right.
how do I feed it? Because it's like 3 steps.
Yeah. 99% of the time, brands live in service of a business, right? I mean, there are nonprofits and there are other types of brands that have different purposes, but for the most part, brands serve a purpose for an organization. So, one of the first things that we do, and we work with mostly legacy brands. So, we work with organizations that have been in the market for a very long time or a period of time, and they already have a brand, right? However, it's defined. So, one of the first things that we do is to try to look at the current brand in all of its glory and try to understand how well it's aligned with the organization's strategic plans for growth. So, is the brand working as hard as it can to support where the organization is headed? Are they aligned? And oftentimes, by the time someone's called us, the C-suite already knows it's not aligned. And that could be for a lot of different reasons. It could be because they have a new customer segment that they're trying to reach, or they have new competitors, or they have a new product, or they just acquired a new company. There's something that's off, that's different, fundamentally different about the organization than where the brand is currently sitting. That misalignment is actually very informative as the foundational steps of trying to figure out where the brand could go. But in terms of what we look at, there's like four things that we look at. We look at what is happening with the company. So, what's happening inside the organization? What's happening with the client or customers? What are they worried about? What are they thinking about? What's happening competitively, because the competitive landscape today is changing very, very quickly. So, what is happening out there? And then the last piece, which I think is so important and kind of ties back to Chime, to be honest, is what's happening culturally. Like what's on people's minds? Sometimes we get myopic, like we're working in a healthcare brand or we're working in a financial services brand or this is a B2B brand. But at the end of the day, like I said, brands are built between humans and humans live in the world. We're all affected by all the other things that are going on around us. Sometimes that kind of knowledge of the market and what's happening around us can yield the biggest consumer insights that can drive branding and make people feel like a brand understands them or really wants them as a customer. So we try to look in all four of those buckets to find some meaning. And the way that we approach it, and of course, every agency has their own secret sauce, but we look at brand truth. So, what is true about the brand? Again, these tend to be legacy brands. What's true about the organization? And what's fundamentally true about humans? What's a human truth that's true? And when you push those two things together, there's usually some sort of tension or some sort of spark that becomes the foundation or can become the foundation for what we call living truth, which is sort of that North Star for the brand that it can follow to bring itself forward and make sure that it's accelerating, growth or whatever the goals are for the organization. It's actually quite fun.
So in the wine and spirits sector, there are those legacy brands.
Plenty.
I like the whole idea of the 4 C's because
Yeah.
I love my little 4 C's. And then there are new brands or new companies that are just getting started.
Mhm.
And they may not even really have a company, for
Yeah.
honest. They may just be a wine or spirits brand that is actually using their personal brand to bring something to market. So it may not be quote unquote a company, it may be an individual. And so if you're thinking or if you're working with a brand new company, do you do
Mhm.
anything differently? And then I guess with everything that's going on with AI, and you think about how do you dig deep around who your customer is, the competition, and then the culture, what's culture going on around your brand. Like, what do you do differently with small, brand new companies? And they may not even be small, they're just brand new. They're just, their brand started kind of more organically, and now they need to actually physically or, structurally do something focused so that they can continue to grow. Was there anything you do differently? Because the 4 C's make all the sense in the
Yeah.
world, but there's gonna be some times where there's more about one C than the other.
Yeah, I think younger brands or newer brands have a different starting point, right? Because usually the organization or the company or the wine brand is started because there's something special that they see in the marketplace that they think that they can deliver on. So I think the starting point for the company when it's a person or startup is what's the special thing you see out there? What's your story? And what is it that you think you can deliver in a unique and better way, even if you're not doing it yet? And I think the other really important baseline, especially for a new company, especially if it's about a person, is what are their values? What do they care about? What are the values that drive their behavior or will drive their behavior as they begin to shape their business? Because those things can become important foundations for the brand because they set an expectation for how the organization is going to behave over time, even if they don't have a long history of that behavior.
So I appreciate that because, sometimes people overstress on certain things, and you can only manage what you can manage. You can only control what you can control. And I feel as though brand is so important, but it's almost like, you can build a plan around it. You can feed it
Yeah.
by knowing I call understanding your 4 C's. We could feed it, but because that last C you talked about, what's going on culturally changes so fast now that you constantly have to keep your eye on the ball. And small businesses don't have a whole lot of money to manage their brand. And so if you're thinking about a small business that's just getting started, they can't really hire a big agency to help them with all of this. What are 2 or 3 things you think they should always do to protect their brand? Because it's like, everybody wants to, because the world is so wide open from a social media perspective, people can steal what you're doing, or, easily. How do you stay relevant, or how do you keep your brand as fundamentally your brand protected as possible? And what are the things you need to do, especially if you're a small business and you don't have somebody else out there watching what's going on your behalf?
It's a great question because I think that is one of the things that keeps businesses up at night, particularly consumer facing businesses, because the brand is so important. And the fact of the matter is a lot of times we don't have control because there are so many other places that the brand lives where we don't have control over what people are saying or how they're talking about it or what they're promoting. That sort of lack of control can be very discerning. But there
Right.
are some things that any brand at any size can do, and it just scales depending on the size of the business. So the first thing that I always say is focus on consistency because inconsistency is incredibly expensive. So be sure that you know how you want to show up consistently in the world. And the smaller the brand, the more important it is to be consistent because you need to be sure that you're hitting the same notes over and over and over again as it relates to the brand. The second would be to get really, really close to your customers. And there's lots of ways to do that. You can listen on social, you can do research, but there are lots of easy ways to tap into consumer sentiment. And AI is a great way to do that. You just have to think really carefully about the prompts and you have to keep going back and keep testing. As a matter of fact, ChatGPT has ways of actually doing consumer sort of sentiment testing. You have to be a little careful because, as you and I both know, Steph, there's a lot of bias in the system. So I wouldn't over calibrate to that. But you might uncover something by testing some things through ChatGPT and then sort of talking to real customers and using that consumer insight to tweak or innovate your offering a little bit or test and learn around consumer insights. The other thing I would say is looking across your customer journey, right? I mean, if you're in the wine business, what does that look like? And zero in on a few places where you can be really proactive about engaging with your customers and understanding the things that are really important to them. Because those little touch points, you can't be everywhere all the time, but you could find a few places to be really special and really magic. Today, so many organizations are being evaluated around their values. So, another place that a small brand or a large brand can really focus is, where do I want to show up in the community? Or how do my values show up in my world around me? Not necessarily in my business, but in the way that I behave. So, sort of community action can be another way to chart your brand, and start to build relationships. And last, and this may not be as relevant to a very small organization, leverage your people. Make your employees brand ambassadors. Make sure they understand what the brand stands for and what their role is on delivering on the brand promise. The more empowered employees are, the faster you build momentum around the brand. So those would be a couple things that would come to mind.
I feel like if I'm thinking about some of the small businesses and thinking about what I went through as a small entrepreneur
Yeah.
back in the day where, I had a brand and I had a actual wine brand and, you were building a company brand from the standpoint of, and some of the same things I even do today. It's a good reminder of what to stay focused on because the noise
Mm.
in the marketplace can make you be very scatterbrained because you see somebody doing something that you do or that you think you are the king or queen of, and all of a sudden you go like, now you're focusing on something else in your sweet spot. So I appreciate the advice. We need to write all this up and put it in some kind of little card and have a class on it.
One of the things that we is easy to forget is that you don't become best friends with somebody in the first time you meet them. You might really like them and you might say, "Oh, I want to spend more time with them." But that relationship, a real meaningful relationship, gets built over time. And brands are the same way. You can't build them quickly. But like, if you invited somebody to dinner and at the last minute you canceled, or you said you were going to be somewhere and you never were, you can unwind those relationships very quickly without being focused on how you're going to build and be committed to that over time. So if you get distracted, like you're saying, with other things, you can debuild relationships very, very quickly. And sometimes you don't even know what's happening. And brands take a long time to build, they just do. And they're very hard to monitor and track over time, despite 1,000 different analysts that will give you 1,000 different frameworks for how to measure them. It's very hard to measure for smaller organizations. Bigger organizations, yes, but smaller, it's an expensive endeavor to measure brand.
Right. You can destroy the confidence that your customer has in you to deliver and very easily, and it's really hard to build it back.
I read the statistic, actually. I was pulling it up for this conversation because I thought it was so interesting. So I'm going to read you the statistics. So there was a recent study by Gartner on customer experience. 52% of consumers they interviewed said they would switch to a competitor after one bad brand experience. 55% of the people they surveyed said that they expect better customer service year over year. 80% of the people they surveyed consider experience with a company as important as its products or services. You need empowered employees. You need to understand the customer journey. You need signature experiences in order to create that connectivity with your customers. We're
Right. So I'm gonna sum up because I'm gonna top things you need to think about in order for our audience to like, okay, we're gonna leave you with this, and then I want you to tell everybody else what you're doing because I know you're doing some other cool stuff.
I am doing
Um,
some cool stuff.
so first thing you said was focus on consistency. The smaller, the more important. That is amazing. So, obviously with wine and spirit brands, your product has to be consistent, but also your messaging has to be consistent. Those are two things that are extremely important. The second thing you said was stay close to your customer. Listen on social. You can use AI, but be careful. What you find out, you need to tweak, but not necessarily so much that your consistency falls off. We
I
can
think it's needs-driven innovation, I would say.
correct. And then the third thing you said was know your customer journey. Know how your product gets to market because it's a really complicated marketplace and a really complicated process to bring a product to market. The next thing you said was think about how you show up in the community, and that may be how you personally show up in the community, or maybe how people who are delivering your brand or delivering your product shows up in the community, because those can be misaligned for
Excellent
sure.
point. Yes.
They can be misaligned for sure. So you want to make sure that what
You're in
you
the right
have
brand neighborhood.
is is how your product's getting to the marketplace. And then you talk about leverage your people. Even though small entrepreneurs don't have, I'll call a lot of people or may not even have any people, they do have the people who actually deliver their products. How do you leverage your distributors? Are your distributors working for you? How do you leverage your retailers? Are they working for you? If you're
Yep.
working with a winemaker or a spirit maker and putting your name on something that they produce, how are they showing up or helping you bring your product to market? Because there are so many products in this space. How you show up and be different and have somebody pick you off of the shelf is very hard to do. And so I think if we think about all of that, those are the things that small entrepreneurs or even the big ones need to really think about because it's just so much competition out there and everybody has good wine for the most part because there's a palate for everybody's wine or a palate
Mhm.
for everybody's spirit.
Yeah.
So, I appreciate you kind of breaking it down into really actionable things that people can do and make a difference.
Thanks. I hope it's helpful.
All right, so tell everybody a little bit about what you got going on.
Well, Hatch is hatching. We continue to work with a lot of brands across a lot of different industries to help them realign with their business strategy and better tell their story and engage with their market. So I guess we've stuck to our knitting in that regard. I really believe that the world has continued to evolve and the way that we think about accessing creative talent has changed. So, as you know, we've sort of evolved our own agency model that we have sort of an agency side of the business and a talent side of the business, and clients can move very seamlessly in and out of both of those. So when you need an agency to manage a project or to help with a rebrand, we have that model. But sometimes we have clients that want to build their own team internally or they want to tap freelance talent. And we have a group of people that help with that as well. So it's meant to be a very seamless approach to getting just the right talent that you need.
Great.
But oh wait, I have to talk about my new thing, and you and I have done it together. So this year, one of the things I really wanted to talk about and talk about getting close to customers, I really wanted to hear my own clients speak about is the intersection between whether you should build something in-house or outsource it. That sort of conundrum for chief marketing officers or brand ambassadors or CEOs, depending on the size of the organization. So
Right.
we launched a YouTube series called Eat In or Dine Out, which really is using that eat in or dine out analogy to talk about should you build an internal team or should you outsource or is it some combination of both? And we've had a lot of fun with that. And you've been a guest, and I've had some incredible people talk about how they think about resourcing.
Wow. Okay, so I did have a lot of fun on
That was
eating
fun.
right now. Being able to actually make a recipe out of my recipe
Yes.
book was really a lot of fun, and then using that analogy in cooking is pretty creative, Miss Jen, as it relates to trying to figure out whether you should bring something in-house or outsource it, and that's pretty cool. I do really appreciate the time you spent with us today because I feel like I got a lot out of it.
Well, geez, that's
You know,
saying something because you know me and what I do
I
pretty
know it.
well.
But it's always good to remind yourself how to refocus. And you did that with really thinking about the 4 C's, thinking about company, customers, competition, and culture.
Yep.
If I can, you can just knock that in your head. It's easy to remember. And when you're starting to think about how I look at what's going on with my brand, if I look at those 4 C's, I can really be
You'll
really
find
focused.
something that
You'll
is
find
meaningful or insightful or motivating.
Right. And then the whole idea of misalignment is extremely interesting. And then the pearls of wisdom around, I think they're one, two, three, four, five. I'll actually write all those up so that the folks that are following both you and me can actually see them on paper in their little journals. They remember them because I think those are really appropriate for how do you manage your brand? How do you make sure you are managing and feeding it? All right, so let's see. How about websites so people can find you if they need somebody to help them work on their brand? And then how do we find you? How do we find the YouTube channel too?
You can find us at hatchtheagency.com, and there's a link on the site to the YouTube channel. I would love it if people would find us on LinkedIn or find me and, follow us as we continue to share information and hopefully more pearls of wisdom around branding. And Stephanie, thank you. Thank you for having me on. I always love speaking with you, and I always get a lot out of the conversation. So thank you.
So again, I'm Stephanie Brown from Sips and Swigs. Sipping Sense is sippingsense.com, all one word. And you can follow me on Instagram, find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, all of the above, Twitter as well. Well, actually, that's called X now. Are you on
Yep.
Substack?
Yep.
Well, I found that new space, so that's pretty cool too. I have some events coming up on Martha's Vineyard, one on August 14th. You can find that on my website. It's called the Sunset Wine Crawl, and we're going to elevate 3 wonderful women of color and their wines from around the country. Thanks for listening, and I will talk to you soon.